In this video, I will tell you an unbelievable story that left its mark on the 1980s and 90s. A story not just about a family falling apart, but one caught in the middle of two different cultures, two different faiths, and a massive geopolitical crisis. It's a story involving love, betrayal, captivity, a life or death escape through snowy mountains, and an international crisis. On one side, a desperate American mother trapped in a foreign country, risking everything to save her daughter. On the other, a father devoted to his country, his beliefs, and his family, yet branded a monster by the entire world. But things are not quite what they seem. The chilling escape story and the suffering I'm about to tell you are only one side of the coin. Later in the story, you will be shocked when you hear the great secret and the mysterious claims that surface 20 years later, shaking the foundation of the "not without my daughter" legend. You will ask yourself, who was really right? And was this an escape, or was it a brilliantly constructed million-dollar screenplay? That's why I recommend watching the video until the very end, without skipping a single second. Because what you hear will make you question everything you've believed for years. If you're ready, we are setting off toward history's most controversial family drama and escape adventure.
A heavy price, frozen mountains, heart of ice. Who tells the truth? Who pays the cost? In the moonlight, all is lost. Between two worlds, a heavy cries, frozen mountains, heart of ice.
By the way, we put a lot of effort into making this video. We need each of your individual support to grow our channel. You can provide us with great support just by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Our story takes shape in the glittering America of the 1970s, at a time when everything began very innocently. The protagonists are people from two different worlds: Syed Buzorg Mahmoody, known as Moody, and Betty Lover. Moody's background is based on a quite interesting and tragic foundation. Moody was born in 1939 in Shushtar, Iran, to an aristocratic and educated family. His parents were respected doctors who treated Allied soldiers in Iran during World War II. However, in a bitter twist of fate, Moody lost his father to typhus, caught from a British patient when he was still a small child, and his mother passed away shortly after from a lung disease. Raised by his older sister, Ame Buzorg, Moody was an extremely intelligent and ambitious young man. Thanks to the modernization policies of the Shah era, he had the opportunity to study abroad. He first went to London to learn English and then, in 1961, stepped into the United States with big dreams. His first years in America were like a success story. During those years when the space race was at its peak, Moody worked as a structural engineer for a company contracted with NASA. He was a top-level engineer involved in designing the separation mechanisms for Gemini and Apollo rockets. However, his desire for humanitarian aid and the medical legacy from his family pushed him to study medicine. He entered the medical world as a successful anesthesiologist and osteopathic physician. It was during this period, in 1974, while working at Carson City Hospital, that he met Betty, who came to the hospital complaining of severe headaches. Betty's life was very different from Moody's. She had an unhappy marriage behind her, had suffered violence from her ex-husband who was a farm laborer, and was a woman trying to hold on to life with her 2 sons and 2 adopted daughters. She was trying to take care of her children by working in a factory that produced door hinges. Moody fell in love with Betty. He took Betty's family under his wing and provided them with great financial and moral support. They got married in Houston in 1977. According to Moody's accounts, Betty chose Islam of her own free will to marry him, and even pioneered the establishment of an Islamic society in Texas. In 1979, their daughter Mahtab, meaning moonlight in Persian, a name Moody chose while looking at the full moon, was born. They settled in Michigan. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A successful doctor, a beautiful wife, a sweet daughter, and a life of prosperity. However, dark clouds were soon to gather over this bicultural family. While Moody and Betty were living the American dream in the U.S., Moody's homeland, Iran, was going through one of the biggest and bloodiest transformations in history. To fully grasp what would happen to this family, we need to look closely at what was happening in Iran and the world at that time. For many years, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, with strong support from America and the West. In the 1960s, the Shah launched a series of reforms called the White Revolution, attempting to rapidly secularize and westernize the country. Women were given the right to vote, educational opportunities were increased, the mandatory headscarf was abolished, and Iranian streets became indistinguishable from the streets of Paris or New York. But this was only one side of the coin. The Shah's brutal secret service, Savak, bloodily suppressed any political opposition, and torture and executions became a part of daily life. Furthermore, economic inequality had turned into an abyss. While a large part of the people lived in poverty, the Shah and his circle lived in incredible luxury. The lavish parties the Shah organized in the middle of the desert in 1971, spending millions of dollars for the 2500th anniversary celebrations of the Persian Empire, brought the people's anger to a peak. In this environment, the masses, united around the exiled religious leader Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, began to revolt. One of the biggest breaking points of the revolution was the Cinema Rex fire in the city of Abadan in 1978. This event, in which approximately 400 people died horribly by burning, incited the people and fueled the fire of the revolution. In January 1979, the Shah was forced to leave the country, and in February, Khomeini returned to Iran amidst the enthusiastic demonstrations of a massive crowd. Iran was now an Islamic republic. However, with Khomeini's arrival, life suddenly changed, especially for women. The gains of the Shah era were rapidly rolled back. In March 1979, Khomeini announced laws requiring all women to dress according to Islamic rules, meaning wearing a chador or hijab. The right to divorce was given back entirely to men, the marriage age for girls was lowered, and women's roles in society were restricted. Although thousands of Iranian women took to the streets to protest this situation, they were violently suppressed by pro-Khomeini militias. It didn't stop there. On November 4, 1979, radical Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took 65 Americans hostage. This event, which lasted 444 days and went down in history as the Iran hostage crisis, triggered an incredible wave of anger and hatred against Iranians and Muslims in America. Now, being Iranian on the streets of America meant being a potential enemy. This entire geopolitical storm was about to land right in the middle of the Mahmoody family's quiet life in Michigan. The hostage crisis and the subsequent Iran-Iraq war that broke out in 1980 began to turn Moody's life in America into a nightmare. Despite being a successful doctor, he was subjected to racist attitudes in the hospital and his surroundings just because he was Iranian. His colleagues started calling him Dr. Khomeini mockingly, and threatening phone calls rained down on their home. Worse still, in April 1982, a 3-year-old child died during a routine surgery where Moody was the anesthesiologist. An investigation was opened, and Mahmoody was suspended. The family fell into a major financial crisis. They had to sell their beautiful house by the river and move to a smaller clinic in Detroit. This exclusion and collapse deeply affected Mahmoody's psyche. He lost his faith in the American system and began to radicalize and feel a great longing for his roots, his homeland. On one hand, his country, Iran, was in a bloody war with Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army. On the other hand, he himself had been declared an unwanted man in America. During this process, Betty and Mahmoody's marriage was also being shaken to its foundations. According to Mahmoody's claims, Betty, influenced by the American press, adopted a hostile attitude toward Iranians, began to incite Mahmoody's children from his first marriage in America against him, and even attempted to defraud Mahmoody by secretly withdrawing hundreds of thousands of dollars from family accounts. Betty, on the other hand, argued that her husband was becoming increasingly irritable, more attached to Islamic rules, and had turned into an oppressive character. In this tense atmosphere, in the summer of 1984, Mahmoody made that dangerous proposal to Betty. "Let's go on a 2-week vacation to visit my family in Iran." Betty was horrified. Every day on the news, she saw the war in Iran, anti-American demonstrations, and the pressure of Sharia laws on women. Going there, especially with a small daughter, was madness. But Mahmoody was so insistent and exerted such pressure that Betty finally had to accept this proposal out of fear that her husband might secretly kidnap Mahtoub from her. Mahmoody swore to her on the Quran that they would stay for only 2 weeks and then return. However, what Betty didn't know was that she was about to be trapped.
Across the world, the dust and gold, a story left to be told. The gates are locked, the air is cold.
When the calendars showed August 4th, 1984, Betty, Mahmoody, and 4-year-old Mahtoub set foot at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran. The fear inside Betty began to come true even before getting off the plane with a strange request from Mahmoody. Mahmoody asked Betty to give him her passport on the pretext that the American passport shouldn't be confiscated at customs. Betty, albeit reluctantly, handed over her passport to her husband. This was the first moment her freedom was taken away. When they stepped out of the airport gate, a massive culture shock awaited Betty. More than 100 relatives had come to welcome them. Cars were decorated with flowers. According to tradition, the family wanted to sacrifice a sheep in their honor, but the slaughter couldn't happen just as they were entering the door. The custom of jumping over the blood disgusted Betty, while little Mahtoub was horrified by this sight and cried out in screams. From the very first minute, Betty was given a manteau, a long, loose overcoat, and a rosary, a thick headscarf. Accustomed to dressing as she pleased in America, Betty was trapped inside these thick fabrics in the scorching August heat. All the women on the street were in black from head to toe. Revolutionary guards stood watch on street corners, brutally punishing those who didn't follow the rules. Betty was even stopped and scolded a few times by these morality police because a small lock of her hair was visible or her socks were wrinkled. They settled into the house of Mahmoody's older sister, Ahmed Bozorg. Although the house was large and luxurious, it was a nightmare for Betty. According to Betty's account, the house lacked hygiene, cockroaches swarmed the kitchen, and the food was excessively oily. The constant togetherness of the family was suffocating Betty, who was used to American individualism. However, a side note is needed here. In Iranian culture, extreme politeness and hospitality, exaggerated praise, and family unity are very important concepts. Betty, an American woman, could not understand these cultural codes and perceived the exaggerated attention shown to them by relatives and the state of living intertwined as a sign of lack of civilization. Sister Ame Bozorg treated Betty coldly and condescendingly from the start because she was American, excluding her. As the days passed, Moody's behavior also began to change sharply. The kind and modern doctor from America was gone, replaced by a patriarchal and authoritarian Iranian husband who strictly followed the rules of his family and the regime, scolded his wife, and barked orders at her. For Betty and Mahtab, this vacation had turned into a complete trauma, with the sounds of Iraqi warplanes bombardment heard at night and power outages. Their only consolation was the hope of the 2 weeks being up and returning to their home in Michigan. But that hope would be shattered forever on the day the vacation ended. Just one day before their return flight to America, while Betty was joyfully waiting with her suitcases packed, Moody entered the room and uttered that blood-curdling sentence. "We are never going back. This is my country. I want to live here now, and you will stay here with me until you die. You will follow my rules." Betty couldn't believe what she heard. She protested with screams, cried, and begged, but Moody's answer was not in words, but with a hard slap. Little Mahtab was seeing her father hit her mother for the first time in her life, watching in horror as the father she always knew as loving turned into a monster. Betty's life of captivity had officially begun. Under the influence of this shock and helplessness, Betty contracted severe dysentery. While she lay on her deathbed in a fever, tiny Mahtab didn't leave her mother's side for a single second. Betty was so afraid that her husband would give her a lethal injection that she warned her daughter, "Don't let your father give me an injection." When she recovered, she faced the legal dimensions of the hell she was in. According to Iranian laws, a foreign woman married to an Iranian man was automatically considered an Iranian citizen. Furthermore, according to Sharia laws, the husband had absolute authority over his wife and child. It was illegal for Betty to leave the country, travel alone, or even work without her husband's written permission. She was no longer a citizen under the protection of America, but an Iranian woman under her husband's ownership. Betty somehow managed to slip past her husband and secretly went to the American interest section at the Swiss embassy. She met with an official named Helen there and tearfully asked for help. But the answer she received was like a thick iron door closing in her face. "You are considered an Iranian citizen. You are subject to Iranian laws. We cannot take any woman out of the country without her husband's permission. We cannot put our constitution in our bags and bring it here." Learning of the situation, Moody went mad with rage. He threatened Betty with death. "If you try to leave this house again, I will kill you." He ordered his family not to leave Betty alone for a single second. Betty could no longer even be alone with her daughter, except for going to the bathroom. She was kept under constant surveillance. Once, Moody even locked Betty in a room, took Mahtab, and kept her at relatives' houses for weeks, questioning the little girl repeatedly. "Did your mother go to the embassy?" Violence, threats, and psychological torture had become the mother-daughter's daily routine. After months of beatings, insults, and captivity, Betty realized that she would get nowhere by rebelling and that she could never escape this way. She made a clever, strategic change. She began to play the role of a surrendered, obedient, and rule-following wife. She helped with housework, did not go against Moody's word, and didn't miss her chador. These obedient behaviors worked over time. Moody's trust in her slowly returned, and he loosened the tight control over her a bit. They even moved out from the relative's house into their own apartment. Taking advantage of this new space of freedom, Betty began to go to Mahtab's school as a volunteer and teach English to the women there. Her goal was both to be with her daughter and to build a social circle outside. When she began to be able to walk the streets alone, she secretly tried to communicate with people. Her first big break was meeting a men's clothing store owner named Hamid in the market, who had previously lived in America. Hamid, who was anti-regime, pitied Betty's situation and allowed her to use the phone in his shop secretly. Thanks to this, Betty could communicate, albeit limitedly, with her family in America. The second big step was meeting another American woman named Judy while playing with her daughter in the park. Judy had married an Iranian man of her own free will and was living there. Horrified by the story of captivity Betty told, Judy mentioned her friend Rashid, who had connections with smugglers. A glimmer of hope was born for Betty. By communicating with the underground world, she tried to find someone who could get them out of Iran. She made a deal with a smuggler organizer named Amal. The first plan was to fly from Tehran to Bandar Abbas in the south, and from there reach the Arab Emirates by crossing the Persian Gulf by speedboat. A second plan was to fly to the city of Zahedan in the east and escape from there through Baluchistan to the cities of Quetta and Karachi in Pakistan. However, due to the harsh winter months, the smugglers' reluctance to include a small girl in this dangerous journey and the danger of bandits along the borders, these plans were constantly postponed or canceled. For a full year and a half, Betty lived a fake life next to her husband, secretly waiting for the moment of escape. In January 1986, Betty received devastating news from America. Her father, Harold, had colon cancer and was about to die. Moody, taking advantage of this situation, made an interesting offer to Betty. "You can go to America to see your father. I bought you a plane ticket for January 31st, but Mahtab will stay here." For Betty, this was the most heart-wrenching choice for a mother. On one side, her father on his deathbed. On the other, her 6-year-old daughter she was asked to leave behind. Without any hesitation, Betty rejected her husband's offer, saying, "Not without my daughter." She said she wouldn't go anywhere without her. Just a few days after this event, on January 29, 1986, fate opened an unexpected window for them. Moody, an anesthesiologist, had to leave the house in a rush upon an emergency call from the hospital. Betty realized that this was the last and greatest opportunity in their hands. She immediately called the smuggler Amal and told him they were ready to set off, risking the snowy mountains and death. Taking only a few belongings, she took her daughter's hand and stepped out of that hell. Smugglers took them and hid them in a safe house in Tehran for 3 days. With Moody informing the police, airports and roads were blocked, and old plans had fallen through. Only one way remained: to escape across the Turkish border by crossing the snowy and steep Zagros mountains via northwestern Iran. On the night of January 31st, smugglers took Betty and Mahtab to a small village near Tabriz. The next morning, in a freezing cold and in the middle of a blizzard, that terrible mountain journey began on horseback. They traveled for hours on horseback through meters of snow, on mountain roads with cliffs, facing the danger of freezing, passing by minefields, and through gunfire opened by Kurdish militants. By walking on that thin line between death and life, hiding from border patrols, at the end of 15 hours, they miraculously managed to reach Turkish territory, to Van. They were free at last. The next morning, the smugglers put them on a bus from Van to Ankara. When they arrived in Ankara, after an arduous 32-hour bus journey, there was only one thing Betty's eyes were looking for. The moment they saw that American flag waving on the pole in front of the American embassy, Betty and Mahtab burst into tears. That flag was not just a piece of cloth for them. It was survival, freedom, and security itself. With the help of embassy officials, their tickets were bought, and on February 7, 1986, after 18 months of captivity, they returned to their home in Michigan.
Between the mountains, breath and desert fire, a broken compass fueled by one desire. Two shadows dancing on a razor's edge, one silent foul moonlit sacred pledge. Is truth a ghost or just a golden cage? Ooh.
This was the full face of the massive tragedy that was lost between the lines, which Hollywood didn't show us, the behind the scenes of the "not without my daughter" story. On one side, the courage of a woman who crossed the snowy mountains, said to be impassable to survive and save her child. On the other, that indelible label of barbarism that geopolitical interests, the media, and Orientalism stuck onto a whole nation. Amidst America's Cold War policies, the Islamic Revolution, and hostage crises, it was always innocent lives, small children, and shattered families who were crushed in between. So, what do you think? Was Betty the perfect victim mother created by the media? Or was she a cunning woman who took advantage of the situation and stole her husband's fortune, as Moody claimed? If you were caught in the middle of wars and Sharia laws, would you have taken that step into those snowy mountains with your child? Be sure to share your thoughts with me in the comments. I will be reading all of them one by one. If you enjoyed this storytelling based on deep research, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video with even more shocking truths. Take very good care of yourselves.